because today, Brianna Jai, hair killers have now been publicly named and sentenced. Scarlett Jenkinson, she was one of them. She received a minimum 22-year sentence. Eddie Ratcliffe, he was the other one. He got a minimum 20-year sentence. And there is a lot I want to unpick in this story today, ladies and gents, because I want to ask you all at home and on the panel a few different things. Do you think, actually, these two people should have been named? That's the first question. They are teenagers, after all. Do you back that decision? Also, as well, how on earth do young people, kids, become capable of doing something so evil? Are they born that way? Is this something that's nurtured into them, or what? Daniel, your thoughts?
I've long held the view that everybody who appears in court on a criminal or on a criminal charge should be named. We should have a system of open public justice in this country. Even kids.
At what stage?
And they should be named, certainly at the point, that's a question you could have two views on, but certainly at the point at which they're charged and move into that sphere where they're going to be appearing in court. And I think we should know this whole idea of secret justice, secret courts, not giving out names, it's antithetical to our system. And people, they have a right also to vindicate their names. You can be accused of something and be found not guilty of it. And that in itself isn't a matter of shame. That is a matter of you demonstrating that you're not guilty of something, or the court failing, at least the prosecution failing to demonstrate you're guilty of something. You're also entitled to vindicate your name through publicising.
Yeah, but people will think often there's no smoke without fire. So if you're
people can think that.
For...
People can think that, but that isn't what the system is saying. And I think people, this whole idea that we have less and less knowledge about what's happening in the courts, we've always operated on a system of public, open justice, is a very, very bad one. And we should be moving right away from that. I congratulate the judge on deciding to name these two people. It's very, very possible she might have decided not to allow that.
Where are you on that one, Paul?
I think only in exceptional circumstances. I think if a case like this, where it is of such magnitude and the case was so horrific, I think it probably is in the public interest to say, yes, we should name the individuals involved regardless of their age. But I don't agree with Daniel that that should be, the default position. I think actually that kids, if they go to, if you're up on a shoplifting charge as an 11-year-old, all right, it probably wouldn't happen in reality. We know that. But if you're up for a low-level sort of crime and, you're before the beacon, you're 11, 12, 13, that's the sort of thing that could potentially stay with you for life.
No, it can't, because it'd be a spent conviction.
But the knowledge would...
Is the spent conviction.
But the public... No, that's not the point I'm making,
You
Daniel.
wouldn't be allowed to refer to it.
What I'm talking about is the stigma. I'm talking about the publicity that occurs at the time when you find yourself going for a job in 10, 15, 20 years' time.
Wouldn't be allowed to mention.
And it's still... Sure, I accept that, but the point is it's still out there in the big wide world. It's still there on the internet. People still know about it. They can still refer to it. People will know about it within your community. So, look, I broadly agree with you that, by and large, we should absolutely name suspects, people who have been charged in court and people who have been convicted. But I think with kids, it probably should be a different set of rules, and I think only in exceptional circumstances is it justified. And I think this is an exceptional circumstance. I completely support the idea that these two were named by them.
Brianna's dad was originally not in favour of them being named, I don't think. Then he said that he was in favour of them being named. And then he said today that actually, on reflection, he wishes that they hadn't been named because, especially this girl, I mean, I've got to say that the pair of these teenagers are absolutely wrong, and obviously. But when you look at the teenager, she was absolutely fascinated by the most horrendous, sadistic, serial killers, torture, all this awful kind of stuff. Well, now she has got notoriety. We all know her name now. So there is a small part of me, Daniel, that worries by naming her, because it's not changed anything. She's going to be behind bars now for a number of years. That's all done. But by us now knowing her name, I worry whether or not she's going to become like some kind of figure of adoration to a bunch of weirdos out in society that are into that kind of thing.
Yeah, there might be some element of that. You can't deny that. But the fact is, you either have a system in which people know what's happening in the courts and they can see it happening, or you have one which is effectively secret justice. When you start on that path, you have lots of other opportunities for closing things down, people who are not mentioned. You get in the civil courts, you get super injunctions now, where you don't know who's behind them. who are, who is it who's stopping the newspapers printing this stuff? You don't even know who it is.
True.
All of this, this spread of secrecy through the courts it seems to me, is very, very dangerous for trust in the justice system, and it's bad policy. So you start with kids and you end up with Russian billionaires. What is the where does this stop?
I think the thing is as well, I don't think that this girl did it for notoriety. If you listen to the evidence in the judge's summing up, I think she committed that crime, and it was horrendous. I was listening to it on the radio on the way down, and the details were horrendous. And I think she did it for personal gratification. I think she clearly had a very dark interest in death and killing and torture, and decided to carry that out. There are some people who kill for notoriety. Probably the most famous example, Mark Chapman, who assassinated John Lennon. But actually, I don't think that was the case here. I don't think she probably cares whether or not she gets notoriety. I think she did it for other reasons. I think the evidence suggests she did it for other reasons.
And what about this whole kind of situation now whereby, it almost becomes something to feast upon. So these kind of cases, I remember it with Lucy Letby as well. You've got newspapers and stuff going, download our podcasts. We're going to explore all the twists and all the turns. And it's kind of like you're almost kind of glamorising this thing as though it's like a fiction-based crime series.
There's nothing new in that. The newspapers of the 19th century, going back 150 years, were much more lurid about murder cases than you would be allowed to have on a podcast today. They were absolutely, not the top-line broadsheets, but the newspapers, were absolutely fascinated by this sort of thing. Of course, they could report stuff from court. There were no secrets. And they feasted on it then. People get over it. What
about this nature versus nurture situation? Because I do confess that when I heard about these two teenagers, one of my first questions internally, I was like, right, well, what's gone on in their life, in their family, that's made them this way? But actually, by all accounts, both of these teenagers, they've got, decent upbringings, loving families, apparently, relatively middle-class upbringings. They seem to be quite, dare I say, normal in their upbringing. So what? It's
so complicated, isn't it? And I think you'd need to be a psychiatrist to get to the bottom of it. I think some people probably are born evil. I think that's probably true. A very small number of people are innately evil, and I think there's probably not much society or medical professionals can do to alter that. I think some people probably become evil, maybe because of their background, maybe because of experiences in their own life. Maybe they've suffered a particular trauma.
Or they get radicalised.
Or they're radicalised, yeah, that's a good example. People can become evil from not being evil. And I think it's true that society will always have sadists. Society will always have people who seek to harm others and carry out the most heinous crimes for reasons of personal gratification. I don't know if that will ever change.
What about you, nature, nurture?
Well, I mean, you have to be a theologian as much as a psychiatrist. The fact is we're all born with a capacity for wrongdoing and for evil. And we we certainly have that capacity and that potentiality, yes. And
I agree with that.
And
do you?
Yeah, I do.
What prevents us from doing that is the fact that we're also born, unlike the animal kingdom, we're born with intellect and will, and they need to be shaped by some sort of moral framework.
I think war
guides us away from indulging, going down the street and punching people we don't like.
I think war is a good example of that. I think when you throw mainly young men into a brutal war, into the front line, into combat with somebody who you present as an enemy, then what people become capable of in those circumstances, especially if they've been fighting a war for a year or 2 years or something in really difficult conditions, they suddenly find that they can, and we see it. We see, people commit war crimes who are otherwise on Civvy Street just decent and reasonable people, and that's an example, I think, of where actually you can.
But the other point is that the second part of that is that we can be restrained from doing that through having a proper moral education, which teaches us not to do things that are bad to other people. And a lot of what parents do, of course, goes into that. A lot of what schools do goes into that, into the moral and behavioural education of children. And that's really crucially important. But there are cases where it doesn't work.
See, I'm not a psychiatrist, I do grant you that, but I just completely disagree with both of you. I don't think that as default, every individual, every human being has it within them to be evil. I think this whole notion of, stabbing people repeatedly in the head, I don't think...
No, I don't think most people would.
You go back to the gas chambers, you go back to Hannah Arendt and the banality of evil. Evil ceases to be horrendous to the people who are practicing it. It becomes a norm. It becomes banal, and that's how it's
they justify it to
through the moral net, if you like.
What do you think?
Seems to be okay.
What do you think to it? David's been in touch. You've told me an interesting story. He says he watched when his 2.5-year-old grandson encouraged their dog into the lounge and closed the door. David said he was concerned about what was going on, peeped inside. The 2.5-year-old had hold of the dog and was stabbing him with a biro. He says he flagged it to his daughter, obviously the kid's mum. And the kid's mum said, it's just terrible too, and didn't think there was anything wrong with that. He says, anyway, fast forward to the here and now. He's just been sentenced for a knife crime at the age of 20 after being on tag for a couple of years. He's got no job, no prospects. He says, I despair. See, I do think...
What happened to the dog?
Yeah, there you go, David. What happened to the dog? What happened to the dog? I don't know. David doesn't tell me the end of that story. But I do find that quite interesting because I would say it's not quite normal for 2.5-year-olds to be stabbing dogs with biros. And like you, David, I think I would have been a little bit alert to something and concerned. Anyway, we do need the end of that story. What happened to the dog?